All right, so I'm back, and so we're gonna continue from where we were in class. Um, where we were in class, we were at the point. I'll do it again in case anybody missed it. So we start up Visual Studio, and you create a new project, which is type console.net framework. So remember .NET framework. I still had some people that submitted calculators that were not were in core. Okay, so I mean you have to be careful with that. Okay, so this will be ADO1, I guess. I'll call this a project. Create. All right. So here's the main. And if you recall, we kind of just copied the code in from the class, which was here. So slide number 11, we had the reader code like this. Paste. So we have to fix it up. You can put a var here, but con is really an SQL client. I'm going to fix this as well. Okay. Here the quote came out as a curly quote, so we don't need that. SQL reader. There's another curly quote here, if you didn't see it. So it's having difficulty getting the SQL connection, the SQL command. So let's fix that by adding using system data SQL client. So it puts it up here, and that's okay. Next, it's not on open, it's con.open. And we then now have to just fix the values. So the database is inventory, I believe. Select star from items. Is that correct? Inventory items, yeah. And this line here is writing each value. So what's happening? The while statement is reading the reader one record at a time until this becomes false, meaning there are no more records left. Okay. For each thing it read, the reader will contain like a dictionary that has each of the column names that were originally put inside the database. So ID, description, and quantity on hand. So here, quantity on hand. So it reads until the end. And when it's done, it closes the connection. So it's very important to close the connection for many reasons. I mean, to release connections to the database, you can't. Some people will have a hard time changing the database if your connection is still open. So with that, let's do debug. Start without debugging. And you have the records here. So toaster, blender, dishwasher, microwave, and everything is good. Okay. Good. So we're fine there. So then I can ask you, how do you introduce parameters into the equation? So you need to make something called a parameter because you would like to avoid making this concatenation here. Watch the video to see why, because it opens you to some forms of attack. Okay, so just moving forward, this is how you do it. So let's say I wanted to select from items here where the ID is equal to something. So at ID, right? So that's a parameter that's variable that can be changed. So we would use this. So the command parameters add with value, you specify what you're mapping, and then you provide the value to it. So command cm dot parameters dot add with value, the parameter name, which is ID, and then the value, like 2. Okay, or even better, enter the ID you want to display. Int ID equals to, no, you can't do that. Console read line. String ID is equal to console.readline. Int okay. So here, maybe pause and make sure you have the same code. It's going to say, what ID would you like to display? Reads it, parses it to an ID or to a variable called ID, and then here it's going to populate this parameter, and then it'll read the one record. So actually, let me run it with without debugging. Okay. So I want to display 2. So 2 Blender 5. And we see that 2 is indeed a Blender. So this is actually good. So that's what a parameter is, and how it works. Okay, so that's the part about parameters. These exercises you can always try. Create an interactive console which asks the user for a SKU, then displays does not exist when no records are found. If this SKU is found, show the record. Use parameters to accomplish this. Okay. Well, you know what? Like what we did is actually almost the same. Okay. Okay. So in order for this to happen, the only thing that's extra here is that, the record doesn't exist. How do we do that? So if you look at the code, the select is fine. And let's say the person enters 8. We don't have an ID of 8, right? So it's going to do all of this, and it's going to open the connection and execute the reader. But the reader will have no rows because there's no record for 8. So you can do the following code if, and it's not in the slides, so if str dot has rows. Okay, but actually we're concerned with if not str has rows. Console right line, no records found. Else, then else you're going to do this this while statement here. Okay, so if there are no rows, no records found, else you read these rows and then at the end you close it all off. So if we run and we enter 8, which is a non-existent ID, no records found. If we run and we enter a real record, which like 3, it'll say it'll give you the record that it's trying to find. Okay, so this is how to do with parameters and no records found. Okay. So here, there's, if you notice before, I actually misplayed it here. We do all the code, and then we're specifying that we close it at the end. So like I said, you need to close it, right? So you have to open it, connection open, connection close. Now the interesting thing is that you have something called a using statement, which it helps you manage the database, meaning you don't have to worry about closing, okay? And that's what it's mentioning here. So the way to do that is like this. So if I put this to the side, okay, I can modify the code that I have here to kind of behave that way. So the connection here, that's the connection. We can wrap this in a using statement, and the way to do that is you put using here, and then inside the using you're going to have two brackets here, so all the code will go in here. Okay, so then what I'll do is I will cut paste, excuse me, all of this code and put it inside the using. Like this. So that takes care of opening. The using is there. Now here's the thing, you don't need this close anymore because you're using a using. Okay. Let's see if that works. How do you want to display to Blender and okay. Look, it doesn't make very big of a difference, but it really did make a difference because there's an implicit close because of the fact you're using a using. Okay. The reader also, which is equal to execute reader. So right here, believe it or not, that can also be put into a using. We didn't do it before, but you can actually close the reader as well. Okay, so you can actually say this, using you put the code here. Okay, so there's another using. So you have a using without a using. This takes care of disposing of the reader as well. I didn't show this to you in the other example, um, but even in the other example, when you run the program, even the open and close of the database itself, it doesn't matter that much because we're just running the program. When the program ends, it closes anyway. But just get used to using the using statement, and you'll see that it's going to help. Well, this is going to quit really fast, but anyway, so that's how it works. Okay, so that's what using is. That's what we're kind of explaining right here. And we just kind of did exercise number 3. Redo exercise 2 using the using keyword, and we did just that. Okay, so let's move on. So we're making good grounds here. Like we have until 28 to go, so there's not too much. So inserting records. Okay, how do we do this? Okay. All right. So I'll make another another project just to show you this one, or should I? No. What I'll do is I will make this into a class, and we can do everything in the same project. And this is actually something you need to know anyway. So how about if I propose that, let's say that this is get items, right? Get all items or get items by ID. What if I wanted to put this into a class so that my program can just use it without making all of this extra code in the program? So what I'll do is I'll add a class, and I'll call it database. So this class will only care about doing database type activities for your program. Okay, so the first thing that we probably want to do is let's convert this and put it inside of this database class, and we'll make a method called read record, and we'll make another one called read records. Okay, so again, if you want, you can pause in case I'm going too fast. So the methods will look like this. Public. Okay, and let's say that I wanted items. Okay, I want a list of item. I'll call it get all items, and this is what my method will look like. Okay, remember, we're making database class, it's get all items, we'll put it here. We can make another method here, which is public item, get item. Okay, and we have to pass it an ID to say which item would you like. So I think you see kind of where I'm getting at here. These can be used then from your program. So we already have the code for this. We just need to kind of replicate it from here. Okay, so make sure this is done like this. Go back to program. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut all of this. And I'm going to put this into get item because you agree this is just one item. Get item. So it goes here. right. So a few things that need to be done. I'll keep this connection here for now. Okay, it's done usually a different way, but let's just keep it like that. The SQL command has to have the using, if you remember, system.sql client. So it has to be put up here. And we don't want to ask anymore the user. Like, we don't want to ask them anymore, what is the ID? Because guess what? We're passing the ID here. Okay, so ID, and you know what? We don't even have to change anything because the ID is coming in and it's being put there and it's just going to work without a problem. But you're wondering, why is this still red? For two reasons. We don't have an object called item yet that we can return. And number two is that we need to return the item. Okay, so let's make the class called item. So inside here, I'm going to add a new class again, and I'll call it item. And this is all it is. It's going to represent what an item is, and it's going to have a constructor, and it's very easy to use. So if I remember, there was an integer which was public int ID get set public string description get and set public int quantity on hand get and set. Okay, so that those are the the attributes, I guess, of an item. It's, you notice they're the same as the database. And now you just have to make a constructor for this. So public item ID, no, excuse me, int ID string description int quantity on hand. This ID equals to ID, and this dot description equals to this desk. This quantity on hand equals to quantity on hand. So guess what? We now have a proper item. Okay, so back to our database. So how do I grab the item and send it back? Now this is assuming we're going to get one item, right? So we can actually just say str.read. And here we can build the item. So we can say, so str.read. So we want to make an item to return it. Okay, so the first thing we can do is we can just say item I. Okay, so here's the item we're going to be building. So we read the database, and then we say I equals to new item, and we have to fill in the values from the database. So we have them all. It's SDR, okay, and ID, which is the first. The description is SDR description, And then the last thing was quantity on hand, I think. So SDR QOH. Okay, so why is this complaining? Okay, these are objects type. So look at the error that we're getting. It's saying that from the database, it's considered to be an object. That's supposed to be an integer. That's supposed to be a string. That's supposed to be an integer. So what's left is to cast it. And it's done. So now I is now equal to a new item from the database, and we have it. Now, the only thing left to do is at the end is that we will return it. Item unassigned. I guess you have to assign it to null up here first. Okay. So there you go. Get item is done. So create an item. We have to assign it to null because it's just asking for an assignment, which is annoying. Here we're opening the database. We're making the command select star from items where item ID is equal to ID. We're putting in the parameter opening. We are executing the reader just once to get the value here, making the item here, and returning that item here. Okay, so there's a lot of there aren't any try catches, there aren't any other validation, so this is not very good code, but I mean this is basically what you need to do for get an item. To try it out. So how can we use it? Okay, so we have database. So make an instance of the database. Database D is equal to new database. So now we have an object of the database here called D, or DB maybe. It's easier to recognize. So now we can grab the item. So item item1 is equal to db dot get item. And let's say I want the second one, the second ID. So I want to grab a blender. So it's item1 is equal to db get item2, and I want to now print it. A space plus item1 dot description plus a space plus item1 dot quantity on hand, and we're done. So that's your code now. I don't know if you noticed, but it's much cleaner and nicer. You know, we have an object called item. We're grabbing it, and if you wanted to see how it works, nothing stops you from debugging, right? To go into it. So debug, start without debugging. This should just basically just print one. If it fails, let's debug it and find the problem. There were build errors. Would you like to know? So what's the build error? Get all items, not all code paths, return a value. See, this returns item, but there are places here where it might not, and I see that here it might not return. So I'll say return null here. This is when no items were found. So there's still a problem. So so we're opening the database, making the command. If it doesn't have rows, we'll return null. So there's one place we could. That's weird. Let me find this. I'll pause the video and I'll tell you where the missing return statement is. I'll be right back. Okay, so actually I wasn't paying attention. It's not part of the one we're working on. So here, to make it stop complaining, you can just say return null here, and it'll stop complaining for this one. Okay, so yeah, so nothing was wrong. Return I here. I believe this one, if this is not there, it still will return null. So this is actually not even necessary. Okay, so we're good. All right, so let's see how this works. Program, start without debugging. Okay, so there you go. It gets the item, puts it into the item here, and prints the item. Okay, perfect. So that's that. Now, if we wanted to populate get all items, how do we do this? Okay, so let's copy this and put it here. So what's different about this one? Fact is, we're not passing in a specific ID, we're getting all of the items. This one's actually easier to make than the previous one. But here we don't have to, we have to start with an empty list, not just an item, right? So you have to say list of type item, items, equals to new list of type item. Okay, so now we have a list that we've created that's an empty list, okay, with no items in it, ready to receive items from our select. Okay, so that's the first thing to change. Then we go on looking what else needs to be changed. This here is actually just select star from items, meaning get everything. So it's as easy as that. Then in fact, we don't need this parameter anymore because we're just selecting all items. Okay. So here we keep everything except inside here we still have to do the while that we had initially. Why? Because we have to read all the records, right? Like if there are 4 records coming back, we have to do this while str read and read all 4 records. Then what we have to do is, so this is interesting. We have to make an item every time. Okay, and then we have to add that item to the list here. So items.add I for the item. Okay, so we start, get all items, make an empty list, open up the database. If there are no rows, no records found, big deal. Otherwise, which we're expecting it to go here, it's going to read and it's going to create one object for each database row and then add them into this list up here. Okay, so when it's done, we'll have a list of items. And then what we return here, you can guess, is going to be this, right? You're going to return those items, which is a list of items. So return items. Okay, so that's get all items. And we're done. To test it out, we can still do this. We can go into the program, and what we can do is we can try it out. So list of item, my list is equal to db get all items. So just take a moment to investigate this code here, and you'll see it makes total sense. Like, you know, here's a list, you're making a new list, and it's getting the input from what we just wrote up there, which was all the items that are coming back. And to print them all out, you need to do a for each. And then we can probably use this this print up here, reuse it, right? And we can change this item 1 to I for each one of these. Okay. So that's a lot of code changes we made in a short amount of time. Just make sure your code is kind of the same. And your testing code is here. So the code is here. Notice that we still have to open up a database object on the top. But we can reuse it. Like we can keep saying get an item, get all items, you know, like this is to read items. So if I run this, I'm expecting to see 4 records with this information just, you know, printing. And is that the case? Yes. Well, it went by super quick. Here. Toaster, blender, dishwasher, microwave, and you know that's the result of this for each loop, which obtained the values from the database here. Okay. So that's kind of important to know how to do that. All right. So moving on. Okay, so we'll leave that there and let's continue with the slides. So the next thing we want to do is an insert of records. Okay, and the insert the insert here, we can actually just take this verbatim from the slide and we can just make it work in our application the way we've been doing it. So I'll grab this. I will copy it. And I'll go into my application and I will make, and we're always working inside database here, right? So if you notice, this is not these simple labs that we're doing. This is more of a real, database class. So how would the method look like for an insert? Okay, so think about it. What do you need to pass it? You need to pass it an object of type item, and it's going to insert that item. And then what is it going to return? Maybe it's going to return the new item ID, or it can return, a whole bunch of things, who knows. So let's make it the easy way though first. So public. Okay, this is what I propose the method should look like. So insert item, item. So from here, let's see here. Okay, so that's kind of like a regular insert. Are we getting the last ID? Do we show how to get the last ID here at any point? Yeah, we do. Okay. So inserting records. So let's finish with this one. Okay, so insert into products. Well, no. This is kind of hard-coded, right? Let's screen the amount, the date, everything is there. So let's make this a little bit better. Okay, so I'm going to paste the code that I had. So the first thing is the SQL connection. We have to keep it the way it was all along. Now, by the way, I don't know if you noticed, but I keep repeating the connection over and over again. In normal situations, we don't do this. We just connect once at the top inside of the constructor, and but I'm just doing this to make it easier for you to understand. So just do some cleanup. Okay, so that's the new SQL connection. The query, insert into products. No, that's not okay. So insert into inventory, ID, description, and quantity on hand. This is exactly what we did, well, when we did the insert commands here. They're not there anymore, but, and the values, we can use parameters, right? So at ID, at description, at, what was the other one? Quantity on hand. Command, parameters, add with value. Okay, so we need to have 3 of these lines, right? One to match here, one to match here, one to match here. So we need to add those values. How would we add these values from this item that's passed in? Because I don't want you to just type what I'm typing, like try to understand what's happening, right? So what you're trying to do is you're trying to pass all the values that are inside this item into these values here. So add with value, ID. And what's the value of the ID? It's item ID, right? From here. That's exactly how to do it. So now you know how to do the other two. It's description and quantity on hand. It's item description, item dot quantity on hand. So just so description, quantity on hand, and so summary so far. From the insert, make a connection. See, I'm going back and forth. Here I'm using, here I'm not using. You know, choose a style you wish. Usually the most accepted way to do it in the programming industry is using. That's a very standard thing. Rows affected. Okay, so it's going to execute the query, put it inside of rows affected, which is how many rows were updated or inserted. So this should be insert item 1. Yeah, right? Because we're inserting 1. Records inserted successfully. Usually we don't write this to the console, but I'll keep it anyway for debugging. If an error happened, it'll be captured here. Take away this console read key because we don't want that to stop. And I think that it's done. Okay. So how to test. Item is equal to new item. Okay. Now the last record in the database is 4. So we're going to add an item with number 5. Okay, that's what we're doing. So the ID will be 5. The description will be whatever, and how many are on quantity or on hand. So that's the item we want to insert. Okay, it's when it's done like this, you can see that it's kind of clear to understand what it is. So an object of type item with its values. So how do we insert it? This is what makes it so easy. Like when you're here, all you need to do is use db insert item. And what do we pass it? We pass it my item. Like this. Okay, so that's it. I'm going to do a console read key because I don't want it to, I don't want to keep having to click run without debugging, and this is going to be easier. So this way I just have to click start. So what I'm expecting it to do is that it's going to insert an item of this item into the database if everything goes well. If not, we'll have to again debug. So start. Okay, so something happened. Invalid object name inventory. At line 84. Okay, so it didn't like something. Oh, insert into items. You see it said that the problem was here, but sometimes it's not. So here, insert into items. So maybe that's okay. So let's try this again. Okay. Start. So another problem. Invalid column name. Well, yeah, I see that's the misspelled description. Description. See, I'm going too fast, I guess. That's why I'm making these little sloppy errors. So ID description QOH. Okay, so maybe it's okay now. Let's try it. But that's what debugging is. You just have to keep, running it. You guys have experienced this, right? Okay, so records inserted successfully, or record actually. Good. And let's see if that's true. Never believe it's true, right? You have to always go here. I'll execute this select again. And you see that dish soap was added with 99 quantity on hand. Okay, so everything is nice, everything is good. Right? So we're happy. Okay, so we can continue. Inserting using parameters. Here's the good news. We just did that. Okay. As you can see, in our insert command, we put parameters here and we populated them here. Okay, so that's inserting with parameters. So we did this. Okay, so that's kind of the same thing, but with parameters. The query allows for parameters here, and we're filling them in here with add with value. Opening and writing and everything is good. So we're fine. So to update, and delete. Let's skip update and delete. I wanted to finish insert, okay? So I wanted to get this done. Does it show how? Yeah, right here. So we have the command insert into inventory description price with the connection. We're giving in the values. We're executing. Did I execute a non-query? Yeah. Okay. So everything is the same. But we have to do this. And here's what my goal is right now. I don't want to have to specify the ID every time I insert, okay? I want it to just get the greatest one by one by one. And the way to do it is that we have to make a few changes. Okay, so see, I don't want to have to go here every time and say what is the biggest one. I want it to all do it automatically. So there's a few changes to be done, and let's do it. So first, inside of the code, we'll make the changes. We copy paste this part here. So query to okay, this is the query. It's select at identity from as new ID from whatever the table name is, and it happens to be the same table name. That's kind of cool. And it's going to give you the last inserted ID that you have created. Okay, so there's two changes we have to make. One is that we have to tell the table to put in a new ID, and the other one is to put that inside the code. So let's put that in the code. Record inserted successfully. Query 2, select identity as new ID from inventory. That's okay. Okay, for command type, we have to import system.data here. And the connection would be con up here. Okay, so the new ID will be obtained here. All right, now we want to pass back the new ID, right? So this has to return something. So we have a few changes to make. Number one is we have to pass, instead of void, we have to pass an integer ID. So that's number one. Okay. Number two is that we have to pass this back, right? So we have to not define it here. We have to define it maybe right away up here. Return ID, so, we'll say is equal to 0. I don't know. It doesn't really matter at this point. Then here we have to set it here. So now if this works properly, it's going to then put return ID, it's going to put the last inserted ID here. And we have to then at the end return the return ID. And that's enough to make it to satisfy its return ability, and it's going to be returned here. Okay. So as far as the code, that is pretty much all there is. We need to make another, we cannot insert this, so we still have more to do. All right. Now, when we're inserting this new way, we don't specify the ID, right? So we have to remove it from here and from here. Okay. Then we don't need to put it here, and we can remove it there as well. Okay, so just as a summary, what did we do? We added we added the fact that we're going to return now the next ID we used, right? So every time we run this, it'll be 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, whatever. It's going to return it. Then here we set a variable so that we're going to prepare to return the value. We do the insert, and this part here grabs the last ID used, puts it into this number, and we return it back. So I know this is a bit complicated, but if you see it, if you follow the path, you'll see how it kind of works. Okay, so that's the magic here that populates the return ID. After, you'll notice that there are two statements executed, right? That's the insert, and that's the get the last ID. Okay, so everything here is okay. Now the last thing to do is we need to change it in the database so that it knows that the IDs here have to be automatically done. So how do we do that? So I'll do a bit of cleanup. Okay, and we need to do a design of items. We need to redesign it. So there. In MySQL world, it's called alter table, but here it's design. So ID is an integer. Okay, and you need to look here. And you'll see that whenever you click, or whenever we click on any of these records, we see all of the parameter, or all of the properties of them down here. Now the ID for it to be auto increment, it's called identity specification. So this way we don't have to worry about putting a number there. It just picks the next one for us. Is identity. Okay, it's now set to no. There's a drop down here. It's set to no. You set it to yes. The seed means where do we start? So you know that already that you have 1, 2, 3, 4, I think, in it. 5. So we should start at 6 or maybe 10 or something, right? So we'll start at 6. And so what does this mean? Is identity? Yes, means that this is now automatic. It starts at 6 and it increases by 1 every time. If you put 2 here, it would be increasing by 2 every time, which is weird and not really needed. So that's it. If successful, you can save this. You see it's not saved. We save it and it hopefully will be okay. Saving change not permitted, dropped and recreated. Okay, this is a very common error in .NET, and it's not an error. Okay, we have to set something for this to work. So don't worry. Okay, for this to work, .NET or the SQL server has to drop your table and recreate your table. It's saying it doesn't want to do it because we've have settings inside of this designer not to do that, to be careful. So we have to change something here. So actually the fun part is that I have to find where it was. So in options, okay, wait. Designers. Ah, here. Okay. So yeah. So in options, designers, prevent saving changes that require table recreation. Okay, that was the offending thing. And now it should actually work. Save changes, and it worked. You see? So now it's okay. So let's make a test here if it works actually. So here's how the query looks like. It's insert into items, but now you don't have to specify the ID anymore. You have to specify just the description and the quantity on hand. Description will be and we have 62 of them. Okay. So executing this, one row is affected, but look how cool this is now. If you select all of the rows, teapot was added, but the ID is now 6, and that's automatic, you see? So since it's working here, we have to make sure it works here. So that's the code currently. Like I won't guarantee it's going to work. I have to test it. I mean, things don't just work magically. This is still okay, but we actually don't have to specify a number for the item anymore. So it actually doesn't matter what number we put there, okay? And what am I going to put here? I don't know. Table mat. I don't know if you saw the theme. It's all kitchen stuff. And we have 11 of those. Okay, Now that's going to work, well, hopefully, but we need to maybe display to the user, okay, a record was inserted and the ID of that record was whatever. So I'm expecting it to say the ID was 7. So you need to capture that ID, and you notice that insert item returns a value, right? So you'll say int last ID is equal to that. Plus the last ID, okay? So that will work, and then we can press a key, and then our program now inserts records for us as well as selecting. So let's see if it works. Of course it doesn't. Let's see, what's the problem? Invalid object name inventory. Hmm. Okay, well, I think it's because this has to be items. Okay, but the problem is, I think it did insert something. Let's just make sure it's okay. Yeah, you see, it inserted table mat, so we have to be careful there. So let's choose something else. I don't know, what's another thing? A spoon. 8 spoons. All right. Okay. Record inserted successfully. Add success. The new ID was 8. See, this is perfect. See, and that's all the code you need to do. Create your item, insert it. Now, you know what? Like, the fact that we don't need to put that anymore inside of the item probably tells me that we don't have to put this inside the constructor. I don't know if you agree, but so we don't have to put this like this weird 0 there anymore. That doesn't make sense. So this looks better. So spoon, fork, we have 9 forks. Run it. There were build errors. Would you like to know what's the build error? Ooh. Okay. See, we used the 3 position constructor here and here, so we still need it. So I guess I was kind of going too fast. So you realize you can have 2 constructors, right? You can also still have one with int ID. So these constructors are for reading. This one is for inserting. Okay. So let's see if that fixed the problem. Yeah. That's annoying. Okay. Good. Fork. I don't know. Spoon, knife. We have 1 knife. Start. 9. Okay. All right. So you see that. So the thing is, you'll notice that this SQL connection is repeated. Uh, Usually we have a bit more time for this project. I could show you how to do it, but you can do this so many ways. You can actually make it inside of the constructor if you wanted. So you can have a database constructor, and then you could make the SQL connection there. Nothing stops you from doing that. Um, or you can have it per method, like I'm having here. Um, the data source here should probably be it should probably be put up here like this. And then we can then just put connection string for each one of these, right? You agree it's cleaner. Okay, so we have get all items, get item, insert item, and how much time do we have? So yeah, maybe I can just put in very quickly the update. So an update. An update looks most like an insert, I guess. So something like that. If you're updating, sometimes some people they actually pass back the item that you're updating. Totally up to you. We can copy everything that was inside of insert and put it here. Okay, we're not going to worry about that. The query will be update items set description equals to where ID, oh, excuse me, where ID equal to ID. Okay, so what I'm trying to do is the following. Update items set okay, so something like this. Okay, so we're going to be setting Blender to new description 999. one row affected. And if I refresh this, it didn't work. Oh, wait a second. What on earth did I do? Oh, here. Execute. Refresh. Okay, there. So I've updated this. I've launched this update statement. Like, I think you guys have already studied this, and it's updated this properly. So we want to do that in the code. So that's the command. So the sco command new is equal to new command. Everything stays the same. Parameters, add with value. Now we have to add a value for the ID, right? So ID, and it's going to be equal to the item.id. Okay, because we're giving in the new item here to update. So that's the thing we're going to be updating. The description will be the description given, and the quantity on hand is the quantity on hand given. So everything up to here is okay. Then we open, we execute the query, we say updated successfully. We do not do this, because remember this was the last ID, like we're not changing any, we're not inserting anything, so we don't care about that at this point. Okay. We can keep this stuff here when we close, and there's nothing really to return because its return is a void. So that's an update. But you see how fast it is? Like once you already have the code there, you just have to kind of add them in. So the update's done, and we have to use it. I mean, one challenge I can kind of give you is, can you figure out how to do the update properly here? I mean, why don't you just pause the video and try it, okay? And here's a clue. You should read the item first, update it, and then call the update method. So you read from the database, update the data, and then send it back as an update. So I'll show you how to do it. So let's say I wanted to update item number 3. Okay, I'll just write here. Item to update is equal to db get item 3. Okay, so we're getting a dishwasher. And I'd like to say that we now have 20,000 dishwashers in stock. Okay, so we get this, we get the item. Let's set the item to update quantity on hand to 20,000. Okay. Then we say db update item to update. Okay, so then read a key. So now we're basically, we get the item to update, which is the toast, the whatever it is, microwave. What is it? Microwave. No, it's not. Dishwasher. Okay. We're going to set the value and change it. We can even change the name, whatever you want. Then we call update and it should write it back to the database, right? Using all of our database code. So let's try that. If it fails, we have to figure out why it failed. Okay, so it didn't fail. Record updated successfully. Press enter. And never, again, never believe that it happened. You always have to check it. So I'm going to select again. Dishwasher 20,000. So it definitely worked. That's the good news. Okay. So let me see if everything's covered. Delete, I'm not going to cover because we... Okay, so a delete I'm not going to cover. I'm not going to cover because I think we did the update and it's the same thing. Really, it is. There was another one which is scalar, which we didn't cover. So let's do that one at least before we finish. Okay. So in this case, we might want to have in the database another method which will return to us what is the sum of products we have in stock, like how much the count of all products altogether, right? Public, so int, and we're going to return back a sum, right, of all the products we have. The actual thing we're doing is this. Select sum quantity on hand from items. So 21,257, right? That's what I'm trying to get. This is exactly what we're trying to do. So get sum of inventory. Okay. Now this I'm going to show you actually before we finish, because I've been putting the connection string here, but you can actually put it inside here. But I'll do that later. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to comment that out. New SQL connection. Connection string. This SQL text will be that verbatim. Where's paste? Here. I'll open this up. I mean, I'm not using any width or anything. This is super bad code, but that's fine. I'm executing scalar. So what does scalar mean? Scalar means you're only returning one value, like a single value. You know, remember that. And it's converting it to int32. All right. And we're putting it inside count. So I'm going to then return count. So I think of all the stuff we've done, I mean, the scalar is the easiest one. You just get a sum or average or minimum, maximum, you know, you've seen all of those. Okay, you run it and then it returns, so that's fine. So in your program, we test it out, of course, and we say plus db dot get sum of inventory. Remember the brackets, it's a method, right? And console dot read key. Okay, so let's go. So the total product on hand is 21,257, exactly what we were expecting, which is great. Okay, so I guess, to summarize, we created the item to hold these items. um, the program, the only thing the program really does is create a new database object and use it. So, we read a single item, we read a list of items and did a for each on them. We inserted one, we updated one, and then we got, the scalar sum of inventory. So those are the few things we did. And believe it or not, I think it covers every single thing that we're talking about. See, so insert query, getting the ID of the last inserted record. And we did that. Okay, there are some other more advanced things like SQL data adapters, but we're not going to go into those because I don't think it's really needed. For your project, you don't need that. So if you can actually manage to make this database thing for your project, for the to-do items, you basically have to just look at this video again and do the same thing for your project. You'll actually have a valid database, okay, for the project. So if you have any questions, just come ask me in class. Here's the code, and I'll show it to you slowly. I'm not gonna put it on GitHub because I don't want people to just copy paste. So here's the code, right? So here's the get all items. Here's get item, single item. And remember these signatures, right? They're very useful. So this returns a list of items. This is a single item. You get back a single item for get item. For insert item, we're still returning something. It's going to be the ID of the newly inserted item. I think that of all the methods, this is probably the most complex. The sum of the inventory, what is that? That's the scalar. And then we have the update. The scalar returns an integer because it's just an integer. And then the update returns nothing. We could have actually, we could have said return item. Back. Okay, because that's sometimes some people like to have the item back returned back to them. Leave it up to you. But if it is the case, you just do that and it's returned back to you. Okay. Oh yeah. We're missing one thing. So the connection string. What if we don't want to put it here? What if we want to put it here? Okay. So question is, why would we want to put that here? Okay. The answer is that when you're running this application, you don't want your customer or your user to recompile the application every time they change their database. So let's say that they change their password or something. or they change the name of the database, because here it's actually no password involved. So they change the name of the database. You don't want them to have to go into your code and change it. It just doesn't make sense at all. Have you ever done that for Microsoft Office? Like, went in and changed the code? You don't. So what you need to do is you need to put it inside of the app config, which is actually available as a config file that's given with the program. Okay, so this is actually shown all the way on top. Yeah, where did I show it? Here, for the system configuration. Okay, if you remember in class, we had to do this adding of the system configuration, and that's how we do it. So I didn't do it here, I'll just redo it. So references, add a reference to framework system configuration. So that's step one. Step two. Am I showing where to put the config? Yeah, so here in the app config. Okay, so in the app config, you have to add this connection strings with the name of the connection and the actual string. Then inside of the code, you put in the connection manager string here. So name connection string. Maybe I can just type it in myself. Okay, so configuration, connection strings. Connection strings. What am I getting wrong here? Add name. Connection string is equal to, you copy paste the connection string you have already, which is this. Into here. Okay, and now your connection string is there defined. Okay, that's step one. And then in your program, in your database, excuse me, you have to use this kind of thing here, configuration settings, app settings, whatever. Okay, so we actually can put it here, I think. Like, you don't have to put it on each one of these. You can just put it here since we've already just put one value, right? So configuration settings, I think we have to add it here. Let's see. Using system configuration dot app settings. What's the problem now? It has been replaced by system.configuration. The expression being assigned to database connection string must be constant. Okay, doesn't like that it's constant, that's fine. And I called it, what? I called it my connection string. Okay, and I don't like the fact it's obsolete. How can we fix this? It has been replaced by system.configuration. Let's just try this out. Okay, I'm gonna, because this is the way I've always done. Let me just research the right way to do it. I'll pause the video and then I'll come back and show you the right way. Okay, so it's changed. They did change something since I've last used it. This seems to be a kind of a newer thing, but it looks way nicer actually, to be honest with you. The new way to do it is the configuration manager instead of configuration settings, dot connection strings. So they actually put the connection strings in their own collection, which is very nice, and you have to call it this way. So you can do both. I mean, this is the old way, and it's if you wanted to do this one, you have to mark it as obsolete, and then you can use that. But since we want to be current, we're going to use the right way, this way. Okay, so that's going to set the connection string. You connect with the connection string, and everything is done. And to prove that it's working, we can run this again because it's using it, and we should get a value just like before. Okay, but again, notice that now your string is here inside of the app config. So you can actually give this program to somebody and they can put their own password here. You never have to give your password out. Everything is not hard-coded at all. That's the more professional way to do things, by the way, like this. Okay. So I think that's it. We're done all the database things. I showed you all the different methods, and I showed you the most important thing: how to put it into a database class, and how to use use these items. So really, you should be following along and trying it out yourself. But this is going to be basically your database manager that goes into your project. Okay, so have a nice one, and see you at the next video.